very good evening and welcome to the Watchdog. My name is Desiree Jauke and I'm standing in for Vuyo Mboko on the show tonight. We reflect on all the political drama this week as newly elected municipal council elected their executive leadership, but also the ANC's head of elections, Fikile Mbalula, is our first guest. Yesterday he addressed the media on the party's performance after a week of drama in which municipal councils around the country were chosen. Mr. Mbalula, a very good evening and thank you for joining us.
We have declined and we have lost some of the municipalities in the country. We did not do well. We did not reach our objectives.
All right. That will be in a bit, but for now we continue discussing South Africa's second pandemic, the gender-based violence, as the country marks 16 days of activism with GenderLink's Executive Director, Kubi Rama, and Mpiwa Mgwijo from Sonke Gender Justice. A very good evening to both of you and thanks for making the time to join us.
This way.
Stop gender-based violence. Stop gender-based violence. Stop killing us. Stop killing us.
Right, the ANC says there's a lot of factors which led to its electoral decline in the November 1st local government polls, including the issue of corruption. The governing party lost all three metros in Gauteng to the Democratic Alliance, which is supposed supported by Action SA, the EFF and others. The ANC succeeded in establishing governing coalitions with smaller parties in the eThekwini and Nelson Mandela Bay metros. In a press conference last night, the party's head of elections, Fikile Mbalula, listed the factors the party says led to the loss of support. And he now joins us via Zoom. A very good evening to you, Mr. Mbalula. Thank you so much for making the time to speak to us.
Thank you, Desiree, and thank you for having us.
I think let's start with the criticism of the SABC's coverage of the local government elections. The public broadcaster has said it did what it needed to do, which is in line with its editorial policies and ICASA's election regulations. What have you got to say to that?
Well, I think is their word against ours. What we are raising is what we experienced, and probably on our part, what we should have done is to raise those issues in a complaint form with ICASA. But yesterday we responded to the question as to what was our displeasure with the SAPC. And I stated that in our view, the SAPC did not run an independent and impartial election campaign. In our view, the SAPC was an opponent of the ANC in this election campaign. In our view, the SAPC contributed to the immobilization of our people from voting on the day of the election. You may disagree with that. It's what I put across, and I don't have any problem with the SAPC disagreeing with that. But I said I raised those issues during the campaign with Patiswa, and then she disagreed with me, and she said exactly what she said today in a letter. And I was responding to Ntebu Mukobo when he asked that question on behalf of the SAPC. Now, for SANEF to suggest that I attacked the editor of SAPC is disingenuous, and at best, it's a short, that is actually fired in a misdirected way. And I think a debate is a debate. They don't have to agree with what I said, but it's for everybody to judge. And I'm not saying entirely the ANC lost precisely because of the SAPC. I'm saying the SAPC played a part in terms of aiding the negative mood and at the same time against the African National Congress. And we did not complain about that publicly during the campaign because the campaign was ensuing, and we raised those issues to the best of our ability with the SAPC. And it might be that people will disagree with what we are saying as the ANC. It's still fine. It's a discourse.
So 2 points. You say that the one mistake you made was not to lodge a formal complaint, and yet you're repeating your assertions from last night. Have you since then found some way to submit something formal to the SABC? But also, just in terms of the displeasure by South Africans in terms of service delivery, how do you think that should have been covered? Do you think it should have been glossed over?
No, it shouldn't have been glossed over. You know, the antics of coverage disfavored the ANC. You know, it was not balanced. And there's a litany and a catalogue of issues I can raise. There was bias reporting, and that is it. And we did not include that in our statement. It was a question posed as to what are the issues that the ANC had with the SAPC. Basically, an SAPC reporter probing the ANC displeasure about the SAPC. And I said that I raised those issues with Patiswa, and she said that allow me to do my work and go and do your work, and if you've got complaints, go to ICASA. And we left it there. So if you ask post-election, what was the role of the SAPC and what is our displeasure? I explain what is our displeasure. SAPC might disagree with me about what I'm saying, but what I saw in the 42 days of the campaign and the role of the SAPC in that particular campaign, I am saying you did not live up to your slogan of independent and impartial. And I raised the matter and I said, criticize, do whatever you do, but leave it to the voters. Do not take a stand. Some of your reporters, in how they were reporting and probing issues, clearly they were taking a stand and at the same time on the side of the opposition, not probing issues and leaving it to the voter. You ran a campaign to demobilize our people from voting, from a negative perspective of saying that voting is not of value. Voting is a citizenry obligation. Whether you love the ANC or not, if people are unhappy about the ANC, they must show that at the polls. And the reason why, among others, there was a low voter turnout, it was this contribution that was played over and over again.
Minister Mbalula.
It is at best. It is at best for any one of us not to go and vote. So that campaign was there. It was out there.
Just in terms of the voting, and then in recent days, there has been the coalition talks, and we've seen the results thereof in the different metros and municipalities around the country, a bloodbath, if one can term it that way, for the ANC's support. Would you still blame the ANC for the SABC for that?
You must understand me correctly, Desiree, with due respect. I didn't say that for all that happened in this election, the SABC account for our downfall alone. I said there's a myriad of issues, which I stated yesterday. Partly also our failures. I admitted that. And then I said that partly the issue of renewal, the state of the economy, the negative issue of COVID-19, how it affected the mood in the country, electricity and ESCOM, issues of water. I made practical examples, how they affected the mood in the country. And I said the SABC contributed to that. And you guys, you want now to say the ANC is blaming everything on the SABC. I said SABC did not cover the election in the way we wanted. I mean, in the way we viewed the coverage. It was anti-ANC. You were adding to the opponents and not leaving opposition to the opposition. You became part of the opposition. And it's not like I raised that matter in our statement about the SABC. It was asked by your reporter. What is the displeasure of the ANC about the SAPC? When I answer you and tell you the truth, what is our displeasure and how we view you, you are now running a campaign as though we singled you out and attacked you. Your own reporter, Ntebu, asked, what is this that the ANC has got with the SAPC? The ANC did not put in its statement complaint about the SAPC. We did not complain to ICASA. But when you ask me, what is the role of my broadcast and what is your displeasure about me? I'm going to tell you, and I'm telling you exactly what I'm telling you. You can disagree with what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a discourse. The elections is over. And a part of that election outcome in terms of how it affected us, including the mood, it relates also to our own subjective weaknesses. So and we know that even delivery on the ground in terms of service delivery, there are issues that affected the mood in terms of communities. We have admitted to that because your reporter said yesterday, you seem to be saying anything and everything and blaming anyone, nothing about yourself. You don't take responsibility. I said we do. And we stated what are those issues that we think from our own side have affected the negative mood and contributed to people walking away from the ANC and deciding not to go and vote. But that does not exclude the fact that the SAPC also contributed.
So just in terms of the way forward for the party, you said last night that it was renewal or death. What does the party envision as the renewed ANC, and how will you go about achieving this?
Renewal is the path the ANC have chosen. It is very clear. Since we adopted the renewal path from our national conference and implementing renewal, the message of renewal is not gaining ground amongst our people. So the perceptions that the ANC is a corrupt party need to be dealt with and nipped in the bud. Individuals who are perpetrating corruption when responsibilities are placed on their shoulders by the ANC, because the ANC is not corrupt, must be dealt with and be brought to book. Our intervention within the state in dealing with corruption, we must raise the voice about those interventions.
Let's just
the ANC's integrity in how we deal with it from the conference and what we have done till this far, it must be emphasized that it is something that it must be out there. So renewal or death means that if we don't renew, we don't do this renewal thing, and connect with our people, it will signal the death of the African National Congress. It will signal the extinction politically of the ANC.
Let's just switch heads quickly before we let you go. As in your role as a government minister today, you were talking about transport entities, and you said quite a few things, but one of the main points of interest was you said the matter of eTolls will be resolved by February next year. What did you mean?
Well, I meant that we have agreed with Treasury that we were supposed to have made a statement in the midterm budget. The Minister of Finance and I agreed that the realistic deadline for us to have finalized everything on the eTolls that is outstanding in relation to the solution that we seek to take to Cabinet, that deadline for us will be February. And the February budget, the Minister and I will be in a position to have approached Cabinet, and the Minister will make a statement on eTolls at that time. So that is what I meant. And that is the solid commitment we are making. And as a result, it is formal because it's an agreement between ourselves, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Transport.
Can South Africans hope for an announcement that will work for them?
We are working on a solution. for the best interest of South Africans and the country. That's all what I can say. The country, in the sense that we must take into consideration all factors, the economy, and at the same time the financial model in relation to the rollout of road network infrastructure in the country. Our decision, how is it going to affect that? It is very important. We take into consideration all those factors. Decision has been taken on the eTolls. We went back because Treasury had to look at a whole lot of other issues that will affect such a decision that would have been taken by Cabinet. So that is why we went back, and we did not announce, because we are working on a model that will be a solution for the country, and we take it to Cabinet, and Cabinet take a decision, and then it will be announced.
Minister, we're getting a question, of course, going back to your role in the party. If the NEC has asked you to resign following the dismal performance.
Sorry, come again, Desiree?
We're being asked if the NEC has asked you to resign following the dismal performance of the party.
Well, I've explained that particular point. Resignation in relation to performance, we all understand this performance. We could have gone worse. So we know that we are in a better position than where we could be. And in that regard, the NEC has been privy to that. Before this election, we were hovering around 38%, 39%. And then we fought very hard to jump to at least above 50%. We couldn't, so we got to 45. It was not a good outcome. Short election that we had to run with all the challenges that we had as an organization. So it is not something that can be apportioned to an individual. We fought very hard, led by the president from the front. The president has proven to be an asset. We have had to go to communities where the ANC did not perform well from the point of view of service delivery, such as Malutia Pofung in Kwakwa. You know that there are ANC councillors that were dismissed there. We had to take the president and the deputy president there, and that is why we got the numbers we got. If that did not happen, we could have gone down to zero. So it's a realistic outcome for us. We don't like what we see, but at the end of the day, we've got to take it because we know the state we're in before we got into this campaign. If everything was well and good, and then we will fall on our sword because we will have failed. But in this particular instance, it is up to the structures of the movement when they get to conference to make that determination. Because ANC is not a company, it's not a PTY LTD. It's a democratic organization. It look at itself in the mirror and then take decisions. So we are going to the drawing board in January and make an assessment of what actually happened, whether or not in a short space of time, the things that we have set for ourselves to do in this campaign, did we exhaust them? And what are some of the things that basically did not assist us and, contributed to the decline? So we are not at that point of looking at the resignation of people and individuals and so on, because this was not an individual responsibility. It's a collective responsibility. And we know when we undertook this task where we were, we knew that we were in danger. Once the Constitutional Court took that decision that we must go to the election by the 1st of November, we knew that we are in trouble. But we fought very hard. So we don't like what we see, but we take it because we know worst could have happened. We could have been politically obliterated. Not even talking about the ANC emergence in the metros as we stand, given what we saw and where we come from to where we are now at the present moment.
Fikile Mbalula is the African National Congress head of elections. Thanks for making the time this evening.
Desiree and the listeners, thank you very much.
So It was a week filled with drama as newly sworn-in councils elected executive leadership across the country. Political parties are taking stock of their wins and losses in various municipalities to make sense of what the way forward may look like. We're now joined by Professor Guillermo Mapunier, Professor of African Politics at UNISA, reflecting on coalition politics in South Africa. Professor Mapunier, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you very much, Desiree, and good evening to the listeners, to the viewers out there.
I imagine you were listening to our conversation with the ANC's head of elections, Fikile Mbalula. Your initial take on that conversation?
Desiree, thank you so much. I've been enjoying your discussion with Minister Fikile Mbalula. What he is saying, goes to the heart of what we call media freedom, as enshrined in South Africa's constitution, and of course, international statutes on media freedom. So, on the one hand, Mr. Mbalula and obviously the governing, African National Congress has got a right to raise what they believe as, unfavorable coverage by the media. In this case, they are arguing that it is the SABC. But I was actually thinking about the other parties that have equally not won, I was thinking about the parties such as, the EFF and the DA, even the independent councillors, some of whom lost, these elections. And the other parties that, have not been talked about, the so-called smaller parties, which could easily and equally complain about the media, not just the SABC, any other media platform. So my view is that, on the one hand, political parties have got to be aware that, the media plays an important role to reflect on what society thinks about. Mr. Mbalula was saying 42 days of campaigning, he believes that, they got unfavorable coverage. But in my view, it goes beyond 42, days, because with us, we look at the electoral cycle. More than 42, days, about 9 months, 12 months to the election day. And in my view, the African National Congress got favorable, coverage in many instances, because I saw many people, ANC voters, one must say, following the rallies where President Ramaphosa was campaigning and other members of the top brass of the ANC, saying that they are going to vote, and they are going to vote for the African National Congress. So I think the media has to be given due where it is reflecting on what the people are saying, whether they are voting for or against the party. So, and on the one hand, I think Mr. Mbalula is also right to say that perhaps this matter would be better, addressed by bodies such as ICASA, such as the BCCSA, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, because of South Africa. Because if you are a party and you are aggrieved, then perhaps we need to, appeal to that body, because South Africa, follows, due process. Regulatory bodies are there to tell us whether, not only the African National Congress, because we have to reflect on all the parties after the election, but all the political parties, whether DA, EFF, ACDP, you name it, even including the independents, whether they got fair coverage. And I think there should be the debate, the crux of the debate, Desiree.
So the South African National Editors Forum says it's outraged at the attack on SABC coverage, calling the attack by Mr. Mbalula baseless and shameful. Are you saying they're getting ahead of themselves?
Look, I think the SANEF, South African National Editors Forum, is a body that has got authority to comment on this matter. In my view, I'm looking at it from a point of view whereby I believe, and I'm led by the cue of President Cyril Ramaphosa when he appeared at the Zondo Commission recently. President Ramaphosa commended the media when he appeared at that Zondo Commission, saying that he believes that the media are playing a very important role not only, exposing corruption, but exposing malfeasance, all kinds of malfeasance. And he says, we as the politicians sometimes may not agree with the media, but so far the South African media has played a proactive role, which resulted in what we are seeing now, at the Zondo Commission. And I hope it's not going to end there. We are hoping as South Africans and as the people who are watching this space that we will be able to see prosecutions resulting from the watchdog role played by the media. So in this regard, I believe that, yes, parties can be aggrieved that they are not getting fair coverage, but it is not for them to blame, the messenger, to criticize the messenger and saying that, they lost partially or fully, wholly because of the media. Because the media is just playing its role in terms of the Constitution, since South Africa is a constitutional democracy. So in my view, I believe that we have to wait until all the other parties can voice equally their views about the role played by the media in the local government elections of 2021, not just one party. Granted, of course, this is the governing party that we're talking about, but South Africa is also a multi-party democracy, and we must also give space to the other political parties to have a say on this matter.
I just want to go back slightly to that response by the South African National Editors Forum. One of the things, again, that they're aggrieved about is what they call they say Mr. Mbalula must immediately stop the personal attack on the Group Executive of News and Current Affairs at SABC, Ms. Patiswa Makopeni. What do you think about this? Is this playing the man instead of the ball?
Look, in my view, I think now, because the matter is now not only in the public space, but has also now, entered into the arena of the South African National Editors Forum. And I believe it is that body that has got, the authority to decide as to what role to take. Are they going to complain, make a formal complaint to the party, to the African National Congress, which in my view, I think will be justified? Or are they going to take, the matter to other platforms, such as the BCCSA or even the ICASA. But I think now that it is in the public space, I believe that, singling out an individual in a particular media house, for me, I think it's unfair because media houses, including the SABC and other media houses that, by the way, that were not singled by Mr. Mbalula, are not a one-person show. So therefore, one should not, single out one person and say we attribute our loss partly or wholly to your role as a media house. But I think it is a matter that has to be sent to the corporation collectively, not to the executive of the SABC in this regard. The idea is obviously to avoid getting embroiled in ANC, SABC, issues, or even the tussle. The idea is to be able to look at the important role played by the media in ensuring that political parties also play their role. Whether they are campaigning or whether they are seeking office, the media has got a role to make sure that these parties across the board, irrespective of political parties, are not hampered. In my view, I don't think the African National Congress was hampered by any media house, in the pre-election period, during election coverage, and even after the election, results were announced. In my view, the media was very fair. It covered all political parties fairly, and I'm actually, taken aback that the ANC would just be able to single out one media house and perhaps maybe one individual. In my view, as I'm saying, and as I keep repeating, it would be unfair to follow that role, because the idea is to look at the totality of the picture about the wall-to-wall coverage of the pre-election, election day, and post-election, activities before you start apportioning blame. Desiree.
Prof, let's now talk about the events of this week, the surprises in the metros and the municipalities. What's your analysis of the ANC's posture post these results? Indeed, the other political parties as well.
The ANC's posture is that one of remorse. If I was listening to Mr. Mbalula yesterday, on the one hand, it is a fair appraisal of why they have not, done well, especially in metros such as Gauteng, the Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, as well as in Johannesburg, and maybe elsewhere in the country. And of course, he is saying that before the election, they were, thinking about the fact that they might have about 38, thereabout percentage points. I was actually much more optimistic, based again on the coverage by the media. I thought that the ANC would get at least maybe around 45, 48%, of the vote. I was struggling, to see it going beyond 50%. And perhaps I was generous. And maybe he's right, Mr. Mbalula, that, they were a little bit pessimistic. And of course, all those factors, Desiree, that he mentioned, whether it is COVID and the others, yes, they do play an important role. They did also discourage, people from going to the polls. The fact that, the election was not held on the usual Wednesday as the IEC, regulations, have made provision, but that it was held on a Monday, and then this made it a long weekend. That also contributed. But on the whole, the posture tends to, look at the more like one can say the problems of the party is facing outside of itself. In other words, much of the challenges or the problems that the ANC has experienced in terms of their losses, especially in the bigger metros, for me, come from the internal dynamics. Some call it factionalism. Some may talk about intra tensions and tussles and so on. And one would want to actually not just want to focus on where it did not do well in Gauteng. When you look at what happened in eThekwini, of course the ANC won there, even though by a slim margin. Also, you look at other provinces. It has done very well in provinces such as Limpopo. It has done very well in parts of Mpumalanga, and even in the northwest, and in the Northern Cape. I've just been looking at the figures, this morning. Just look at all those councillors, the majority of whom are African National Congress. So, on the one hand, yes, the ANC, is remorseful and believes that it could have done much more better. But I think, on the whole, it hasn't done, worse off, such that the political obliteration that Mr. Mbalula was referring to, I think has happened, because I think it has in other provinces where it has retained the majority of its traditional voters. Of course, it has lost in those municipalities where much of its support went to the EFF, or it was divided between the DA as well as the Freedom Front Plus and other smaller parties, the Patriotic Alliance, and of course parties such as that one of Mr. Mashaba and the ACDP and so on. So we've got to look at this thing much more broadly, Desiree, not just looking at the main losses like in the key metros, but we must also look at where it has done well. And this might also mean something about when the party reflects. That is not all doom and gloom. There are some instances where it managed to do well in its traditional voters. Of course, the majority of their voters did not vote because they said on air, whether it was SABC or any other media house, they were telling the journalists that they are not going to vote because they believe that their party is not giving them services. The very same African National Congress.
So, Professor Mapunier, after all the wheeling and dealing, most councils have elected their executive in the hung councils. Do you think the current structures will hold for the next foreseeable future?
That is a tall order, Desiree. In the short term, between now and let's say 6 months from now on, we will start seeing the dynamics. Personal dynamics, because of all these party candidates as well as the elected councillors have got to start bonding, have got to start understanding how to work with each other and sharing ideas and all those things, and of course identifying the key reasons why they have been voted into power by the voters who did not give any one party outright majority. So they will have to work together in a coalition. So in the short to medium term, we expect, or at least I do expect, that they will see the bigger picture, which is to serve the voters of South Africa and make sure that they deliver the services, electricity, water, sanitation, and so on, as all the councils globally have to do. However, in the long term, let's say 3 years to 2026, which is when the next local government elections will be held, we will start seeing the true role played by these parties, as well as the true colors, some of which might actually decide to break away from those coalitions and, decide to go back into the opposition benches, or even just, withhold their votes. So therein lies the danger, the risks of political instability. So on the one hand, I've got, I'm optimistic that many of these councils will be able to work together, knowing that, this is what the voters expect them to work together, in spite of the fact that they are in a coalition. But on the other hand, we could see, that political instability that normally comes out when political parties start flexing their muscles, trying to show who is more cleverer, who has got more ego, and so on and so on. And some even calling, others, smaller political parties, the term that shows that disparagement or disrespect of parties that are not in the majority but they are in the minority. So we will see how it goes. But in the interim, I believe that South African political parties have got to smell the coffee and know that coalitions are now here to stay, and they must learn to work together as the voters have, dictated to them.
Professor Guillermo Mapunier, thank you so much for making the time this evening.
Thank you so much.
Professor Mapunier is the Professor of African Politics at UNISA. Now onto the story. The Democratic Alliance says it will not be dependent on nor be dictated to by the EFF on how to run municipalities. This comes after the EFF and Action SA helped install the DA mayors in Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni and Tshwane as they all ganged up against the ANC. The party's top brass today unveiled its newly elected mayors from across the country. SABC reporter Natasha Piri filed this report.
Over 20 newly elected DA mayors from across all 9 provinces were presented by the party's leadership at Nkululeko House, east of Johannesburg. Earlier this week, the ANC was ousted in several municipalities as the DA took up mayoral chains with the aid of Action SA and the EFF. On Thursday, EFF leader Julius Malema said their vote for the DA was a vote against the ANC. He further claimed that he foiled an agreement between Helen Zille and ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa that planned to retain certain municipalities under the rule of the ANC. Zille has poured cold water over these claims and says they will not be dependent on the Red Berets in council.
He doesn't want to be in government. He wants to control the officials, their decisions, the tenders and contracts and the policies that are applied in government. And so he says, appoint this person as your municipal manager. Give this tender to this company. Ensure that you follow this policy. And if you don't, we will withdraw our support and your government will fall. And that is not the kind of relationship we envisage. And that is why, through the course of these negotiations, we were absolutely plain. And we said, we are prepared to be in opposition. We are not prepared to sell our souls. And it was that tough line that had the very unintended consequence of the people against whom we took the tough line actually voting for us and putting us into government.
Party leader John Steenhuisen says the party is still continuing with coalition talks. Earlier this week, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba vowed that they will not go into further coalition talks with the DA without Malema, and has urged the DA to demonstrate the same level of maturity shown to them by the multi-party coalition group and resume negotiations that put the interests of the residents first.
I also want to point out that our talks with other parties that haven't signed the coalition agreements are still ongoing. We're reaching out to these parties in good faith and with humility as we try to establish majority coalitions in these hung councils.
Meanwhile, the various mayors have outlined their plans of making the municipalities they govern in a better place. Newly elected Executive Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Dr. Mpho Phalatse, says she wants to put a moratorium on the filling of vacancies and extension of contracts until there is proper executive oversight in place. Ekurhuleni Mayor committed herself to delivering basic services to all communities in the city.
To stick to turnaround times when there is an electricity outage, when there is a burst water pipe, when there is a sewage spill.
By working very hard over the coming years, and that work has started already, to end load shedding in Cape Town, to be the first place in the country that is free of load shedding.
Steenhuisen further urged the DA mayors to work on strengthening coalitions within their respective municipalities. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, it's time now to take a quick break. We continue discussing South Africa's so-called second pandemic, gender-based violence, as the country marks 16 days of activism with Gender Links Executive Director Guillermo. Stay with us. For no violence against women and children. The Minister of Women, Youth and Persons Living with Disabilities, Maitengwana Mashabane, highlighted the role communities can play to put an end to the scourge. I'm now joined by Gender Links Executive Director Guillermo. Thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today, just in a conversation today about the language of gender violence. Do you think the media is playing its role in the fight against gender-based violence in its coverage?
In a word, no. I mean, just for example, this interview, I think thank you for having me on the show and for highlighting the issue. But why now? Why during the 16 days and not the entire year? And when we use words like scourge, and we use words like when we're talking about teachers impregnating pupils, we talk about teenage pregnancy and the teenager having gotten pregnant by a teacher. She was raped. Whatever the circumstances are, that's an underage girl that had sex with an adult. So we need to start using language in a much more conscious way, and we need to start featuring the issue of gender-based violence in a much more consistent and coherent way across the whole year. So Gender Links did some research with the German Development Corporation, GIZ, and found that on television news, there was only 2% coverage of GBV in a constructed month. So it's clearly not an issue that's getting enough coverage, and we're certainly not talking about it in a way that is moving us forward. It's not just about the coverage, but also what we're saying. Because even everything we're talking about, how central is prevention to that agenda?
So we're speaking about media coverage, but clearly there needs to be a mind shift in different sectors of community. For argument's sake, when a particular case then goes to court, a person who is now bringing the case to court is called an accuser. Again, issues with language.
Absolutely. The way we name things. So, for example, what is corrective rape? There's no such thing. It's rape. Why do we give things legitimacy by naming them in particular ways? Somehow it gets credence when you make it a term that is socially acceptable. There's no such thing as corrective rape. It's rape. It's a crime. Simply because it's happening to lesbians should not make a difference. Similarly, we have terms like sex tourism. All of these things, we need to be so careful. And I have an issue with the way we call gender-based violence a scourge. A scourge is often used to describe diseases, the Black Plague, etc. This is not a scourge. This is something that, human beings are perpetrating. And we need to look at how we get to a point where we prevent this from happening. We mustn't use terminology that takes it out of our control in a way.
Yeah. So where should the shift be happening? Is it in the classroom, starting from basic education? Is it in the home? Where should it be happening?
It should be happening everywhere, but you're right. In research that we have done about on the prevalence of gender-based violence, a lot of people who are experiencing violence or perpetrating violence witnessed this in their childhood. That's not to say everyone who did is now a perpetrator of violence or victim or survivor. However, clearly the power relations and how those play out, we learn very young. So we need to start addressing those very young. And of course, a key strategy of prevention must be to prevent either witnessing or experiencing violence as a child. Because if a child is seeing that as normalized and growing up with that as that is how things are, you have to turn that around. You have to unlearn that. So we need to start there. And then, of course, the messaging we're putting out. So, for example, it's amazing how, during COVID, we found the resources to address what was the parallel pandemic of gender-based violence, because suddenly survivors found themselves in lockdown with the perpetrators with very little escape. So we found ways to deal with it. I think the important thing as we move forward is to sustain those strategies that we managed to find during COVID, but also the resources to support those.
Could we just finally, of course, we're right in the middle of 16 days. How should we be approaching this time in an impactful way?
In my view, really what this time must be about is taking stock. What have we done well? What do we need to do better? What do we need to get a handle on? So, for example, things like violence against LGBTI persons, which has become a massive issue during COVID. It's the extent of GBV, how, what is the result? What are the effects of GBV that has occurred during COVID? What kind of response does it require? And things like, a big issue for people in abusive situations is where will they live? How will they fund their children's schooling? So to make the very important link between economic power and the prevention and reduction of gender-based violence. A lot of survivors will leave abusive relationships if they have a source of income and a place to live. And not just a shelter for a prescribed number of days, but a longer-term, permanent way of living that will then give them the opportunity to rebuild and realize their own ability to control their lives.
Guillermo is a director at Gender Links. We thank you so much for your time this evening. On to this now. South Africa has registered 2,828 new positive coronavirus cases and 12 new related deaths. Earlier, the Minister of Health, Dr. Joe Phaahla, said the travel ban imposed on South Africa by certain countries is premature and not in line with the World Health Organization standards. This comes as several countries in Europe, Asia and the Middle East impose travel bans to and from the country following the emergence of a new COVID variant in the Southern African region. The B.1.1.529 strain has been detected in Gauteng, but is understood to be spreading rapidly to other provinces.
We want to be, honest players in the world. We want to make sure that we share information which is to the health benefit of not just South Africans, but also citizens of the world, that we must continue to share this information. So I think others were more like comments to say this could have even arisen from Europe. As I said, we didn't want to go that way, but because we understand that at any given stage, these mutations are happening all over the world. And as they arise, if your scientists make an observation that these are not insignificant mutations, but these are variants of serious concern, then they need to actually report on that. Now, in terms of on the vaccines, what we are saying is that, as has been indicated already, that the pattern still remains that people who are not vaccinated are contributing more to hospital admissions. It's still early days in terms of this particular variant, but already in terms of the small sample, which has been, which we can only comment on, even with that small sample, is still 1 in every 4, one person who's vaccinated who can get admitted, compared to 4 who are not vaccinated. Now, I think again, Ian will respond to this, but I think he had already mentioned that there are breakthrough infections. There are, amongst the people who are getting infected, there is definitely, as has been the case with the previous variants, there is amongst them people who are vaccinated, but that's far in terms of severity. It might still be early days, but there's no indication that those who are vaccinated, as it's indicated that the majority in terms of hospital admissions at this stage are those who are not vaccinated.
Well, that's the Watchdog for this Friday evening. Guillermo will be back on Monday evening. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.